Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, oh my God, it's Friday the 13th. Yes, it's Friday the 13th, 2019. I would play you the horror dramatic music, but that would, of course, interrupt our intro music. I have learned that lesson in painful ways in the past. So, let's talk about something else for about 2 minutes, and then we'll play that dramatic music just so that everyone can have a chance to hear it on Friday the 13th. If you're not a superstitious person, it's still Friday the 13th. There's nothing you can do about it. Just because you're enlightened doesn't mean it's not Friday the 13th, you know. And the rest of us have to deal with these things. So, get up, get out from underneath the ladder you might be hiding behind or underneath, or cross the path of a black cat if you prefer. Smash a mirror, spill salt, do something like that. And just flaunt it, I say. Go for it, and we'll see what happens. The president is now awake and tweeting, so we have that to kick around if necessary. Plenty of other stories to catch up on. Maybe we can throw a few, let's say, eclectic twists into things. We have some pre-recorded segments from our friends Brian Monroe and Eric Postman, which means I'm now pledged to playing them, I guess. I'm going to try and do that. Why not make it a relaxed Friday morning for me, and an exciting Friday morning for the rest of you. Get to hear somebody else's voice for a change. Let's see. The president is awake and tweeting, asking, how dare anybody attempt to impeach him? The way he puts it this morning, how do you impeach a president who has helped create perhaps the greatest economy in the history of our country? Which he capitalizes, and that's nice. All-time best unemployment numbers, especially for blacks, Hispanics, Asians, and women, and other people who hate me, I guess. This is his list of things. More people working today than ever before. Rebuilt military and choice for vets, which again, this is like the 90th time he claimed that he signed that and he didn't. Became number one in the world, or he created it and he didn't. Became number one in world and independent in energy. Everyone, congratulations. We've become number one in the world, according to blank outlet for blank reason. But there we are, number one in the world and independent in energy. We'll soon have record number of judges, which is really nothing to be that excited about. 2 Supreme Court justices. And again, you did nothing there. You literally, all you had to do was hand over a list of names that somebody gave you. But okay, whatever. That's a huge accomplishment. Done more than any president in first 2.5 years, despite phony and fraudulent witch hunt illegally led against him. Win on Mueller report, Mueller testimony, and James Comey. IG report, which showed him to be a disgraced and dirty cop. Republicans have unified like never before. You don't impeach presidents for doing a good, parentheses, great, exclamation point, job. No obstruction, no collusion, back to the old lines. No obstruction, no collusion, only treasonous claims committed by the other side and led by the Democrats. Sad. Wow. Well, how do you do it? How do you impeach a president like that? Well, with votes. Okay. Easily answered. I mean, what can I tell you? It's a strange situation they got going on here, and I guess the staff is already leaving early for the weekend. The real action, as he noted in this morning's post, is that, happens over the weekend when the staff leaves and he gets his phone and he can do what he likes and he heads to the golf course. There's brief breaks in it when he goes golfing, but it's heating up already. So here we are. Daily Co's Radio is live now on this Friday the 13th. Finally got the chance to play the horror dramatic music. That's what Bill tells us anyway. Friday the 13th. We're in agreement on that. And staff at Daily Co's Radio urge you to fear the unknown responsibly. Please. Absolutely. Do be responsible about it. Let's see. Places to go and stories to visit. This morning, let's see. We have got this note. along with a few others. I guess noting yesterday that I can't recall what convention the press had decided to adopt on the name of the Prime Minister of Japan, whether we were going to continue to say Shinzo Abe in the Western style because the family name is Abe, or whether we were going to. I guess the real story is that the Japanese government, press office, I suppose, had made the request that we sort of honor the Japanese tradition in doing it. And I mean, I don't know. I was going to say I try hard to get the correct pronunciations for names and places and things, although I don't try very, very, very hard because that would require doing it ahead of time. But, you like to pronounce the names as close as you can to the way others, they would pronounce their own names. You'll be the ultimate guide on how you want your name pronounced. Just don't screw around with it. Tell us how it's really pronounced. And let's see. We got this comment from listener Absinthe, going by the Absinthe handle on Twitter, who said, I guess Abe, his family name is Abe, so you'd want to say Abe Shinzo, but people who aren't familiar with the preferred way to state his name would probably say Shinzo Abe, and that's what we do here in the United States. But I also got an email on the subject from Gil Aquino, who writes to us from time to time, and who sent me the NPR story, an NPR story on it, which, I don't know, it seems to indicate as though their headline tries to hint at some sort of strange dark controversy about it, but I don't think so. Shinzo Abe, or Abe Shinzo, Japan's foreign minister, tells the media, there's the answer, tells the media to change the order. And the little blurb for the article that comes in the email that he sent me says, Taro Kono, says that would be the Japanese foreign minister, who I assume is Mr. Taro Kono, because he's asking overseas news outlets to write Japanese names with the family name first, as is the custom in Japan. But this is the weird part. But some wonder why the suggestion is coming now. And give us an opportunity to play the dramatic music again. I don't know. Why is this story coming now? I don't know if there's anything sinister about it. Let's find out. That intrigued me enough to read the article to you. Shinzo Abe, or Abe Shinzo, Japan's foreign minister, tells the media to change the order. This is from back in May. Japan's foreign minister is making headlines. In what order, we don't know. But he's making headlines by pushing back on headlines themselves. This is very dramatic. At issue, the order in which foreign media write and say Japanese names. In a news conference today, Foreign Minister Taro Kono said he plans to ask overseas news outlets to write Japanese names with the family name first and the given name second, as is the convention in Japan. I plan to ask international media organizations to do this. I assume, is this him executing the plan? I always wonder about that when people say that. I plan to ask international media organizations to do this. Well, go ahead. I'm free now. What? Ask me. I thought I just did. I thought you were just planning to. But I'm here for that. Domestic media outlets that have English services should consider it too, he said, according to Kyodo News. So are other languages doing the same thing? All right. Kono noted that news organizations generally give Chinese and Korean names with the family name first, as in Chinese President we'll have to work on our pronunciation here. Xi Jinping, or was it Xi? President Xi Jinping, and South Korean President Moon Jae-in. His efforts to get the world to say Japanese names in the Japanese style seems in part to be a matter of timing. So now we get to the bottom of this part. A new era, the Reiwa, I guess, Reiwa, R-E-I-W-A. Reiwa, we'll hope that's it. Oh, and here's a little definition here. Began on May 1st as Emperor Akihito abdicated and his son Naruhito ascended to the throne. And Japan will soon play host to a number of major international events. The G20 summit, I guess next month, that would have been June, which I suppose happened. The Rugby World Cup in the fall. How about that? That's coming up. We'll all watch that together, shall we? And the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo next summer. That's a big deal, too. This isn't the first time that Kono has brought up the matter. He's starting to get pissed, I think. It's natural to discuss whether such a change should be made, including whether it should be in time for the Emperor's Ascension ceremony in October, or the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics in 2020. The Mainichi reports, he said, in March. So that's a Mainichi. It's M-A-I-N-I-C-H-I. I don't know whether we're meant to pronounce that in anglicized form as Mainichi or Mainichi, and they had that extra syllable. I'm going to do that. The practice of putting the family name second when transliterating Japanese names is believed to date from the 19th century, when reformers in the Meiji dynasty sought to adapt to international standards. Aha, that's the answer. The Washington Post reports. It's not clear what Prime Minister Shinzo Abe or Abe Shinzo, it says that right here, makes of the suggestions to change. There are a lot of factors we have to consider, including convention. Yoshihide Suga, the government's chief spokesman, told a news conference. On his own English-language Twitter page, the foreign minister writes his name as Kono Taro. Aha. So they did it backwards here? Really? That just seems so wrong. They did that. They did, right? They had Foreign Minister Taro Kono. Right in the article about how would you please call me Karo Tono. Okay, well, this is kind of bizarre. I don't know why you would do that. But, or maybe they're saying, maybe his last name is Taro, but on his Twitter page, he reverses it because it's English conventions. I don't know. He speaks fluent English and has tweeted a photo of himself as a senior at Georgetown University, interning on Capitol Hill. Many news outlets, including NPR for the most part, follow the Associated Press on matters such as how to handle foreign names. The AP style book has a section on Chinese names, which says in personal names, Chinese generally place surnames first and then given names. Deng Xiaoping, for example. Second reference should be to the family name, Deng in this case. In general, it says, follow an individual's preferred spelling. The AP style book section on Korean names notes in both Koreas, the family name comes first. It has no entry for Japanese names. This seems odd. Some observers see Kono's request to change the name order as a signal of Japanese nationalism. Well, I wouldn't go that far, but okay. I mean, sure, why not? Mild nationalism. Nationalism that has been a part of a conservative administration of Abe. I guess he is... It wouldn't be difficult to see him being influenced by Trump in this way. Okay, continuing on. Shakiko Ishikawa, a translator in Tokyo, whose mother is German and father is Japanese, told the New York Times that such a change would mark a step backward. To be honest, I think this is a small symptom of a much bigger problem, she said. The world is shifting toward right-wing ideologies, so it's obvious that this isn't so much about how to write about Prime Minister Abe, but rather a sloppy way to establish their nationalistic sentiments and demands overseas. How interesting. Well, I mean, I actually find that well worth the time. I wasn't 100% sure we were going to get anything more out of it than a reaffirmation of someone's efforts, and I had forgotten whose efforts they were to change the order. But well, leave it to the Japanese to leave us with a subtle and interesting puzzle to work out along with the story itself. Leave it to the Japanese, not because the Japanese are particularly inclined to do so, but because that's whose story it is. I don't want to leave it to the Danish. They don't know anything about it. Okay. So, let's find ourselves some other stories to poke around in. There was a debate. I don't know if any of you saw that last night. You know what the answer is when you ask me, did I see the debate? There was no chance I was going to sit around and watch that. But we can look to Mark Sumner for his summation of what happened. He was on hand to live blog, and I think I saw a hint late last night that, it was written earlier, but by the time I saw it, it was late, that Joan would join in on the live blogging duties as well. So I'm sure she was thrilled to death about that. I think she actually enjoys it, but not handling every single one. Mark seems to thrive with it, though. And this morning on the front page at Daily Kos, we find the following story. Third Democratic debate shows a strong field. Is that what you saw? And a lot of reasons Trump should be afraid. Excellent. And maybe that's what's behind his tweeting this morning. Picking a winner from the third Democratic presidential debate was difficult, Mark says, not just because there are still so many people on stage, but also because so many of them had a good evening. Good evening, everyone. And while the media seems to be celebrating the fact that there were a few sharp exchanges, the truth is that there were very few. For the most part, candidates were much more willing to talk about what they believed was right rather than where fellow Democrats were wrong. That's nice. And everyone was in agreement that Donald Trump was a disaster, an embarrassment, and a threat who had to be removed from the national stage. I'm with you. As a theme for the night, we all agree Trump has to go was not bad at all. That doesn't mean every answer was sterling or that every candidate had a great evening. For the most part, little happened that would seem to have much lasting impact on campaigns, save for one incident. Here's a brief rundown of how the candidates handled themselves and others during the debate. Let's find out. Joe Biden, it says here, was not great, but he also wasn't bad. He has developed a serious habit of thinking of something else he wants to say before he completes the current thought. I have that habit, which often means the person cutting Biden off in mid-sentence is Biden. In a couple of instances Thursday night, particularly when talking about education, and an unfortunate subject on which to have this problem, his tumble of ideas so outran what Biden was saying that the answer became almost incoherent. And Biden's "I'm for Barack" answer on healthcare still represents his major, somewhat unsurprising theme. Remember the guy I used to work for? Had it not been for one moment, people would probably be talking about how Biden had an off night. But Biden's night turned out to be a couple of notches better than it might have been thanks to Julian Castro. Let's find out. Further, next up is a bullet point here, a bullet paragraph really, on Elizabeth Warren, who has a plan. In this case, it's not her plan for the economy or education or healthcare or the climate crisis, though she certainly has those as well. No, Warren has a plan for how to handle debates. That plan is not to get involved in the tit-for-tat of back-and-forth answers. At one point in the 3-hour debate, why didn't I watch? The 3-hour debate, Warren didn't speak for almost 40 minutes, and she refused to launch into a rebuttal of other candidates' statements or try to interject herself into the byplay. Instead, Warren sits back, waits to get a question directed her way, and answers it at length. Which, we like her for, right? Okay, Bernie Sanders had a cold. Okay, that's too bad. Or at least his voice was strained from the effort of talking over crowds 20 hours a day. And of course, that wasn't the most important thing about Sanders or what he came to say, but it did shape something of the energy with which his replies were made, turning down the dial a bit, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Sanders was at his best early in the night in what was probably the biggest real clash, in which he traded healthcare claims with Biden. But generally, Sanders was good throughout the evening. The strangest thing was how much the media had already scripted the evening as a Biden-Warren clash, which did not happen. But Biden-Sanders was genuinely good. Kamala Harris seemed somewhat shaky at the beginning of the evening, but recovered and spent most of the evening displaying a good mix of humor and tough positions. Harris was forced to defend her role as a prosecutor and mostly did it well, but the way things were pitched at her definitely seemed to be more as accusations than as questions. But Harris had some great moments, including in talking about the need for black teachers in early childhood education. Cory Booker had a really terrific evening, and a night on which several candidates seemed to be taken aback by the nature of the questions or find themselves entangled in exchanges that generated more heat than light. Booker seemed at the top of his game. He was smooth without being slick. He got in moments of humor, moments of passion, and a good deal of his own plans. In terms of sheer performance, he was the best on stage that night. The best of the night. Pete Buttigieg had a decidedly mixed evening. He was at his best in talking about his personal story. For a moment there, everyone watching needed to step back and simply think about the fact that there has been a genuine change in national attitudes when it comes to LGBTQ Americans. But Buttigieg was also intent on trying to set himself apart on healthcare by making some attacks on both Biden and on Medicare for All. And those attacks on the damn bill on one hand and on how, unlike Bernie and Warren, he trusts Americans on the other, were among several grating moments. Amy Klobuchar was so absolutely intent on not being labeled a leftist that it sapped the energy from many of her answers. It wasn't that she said bad things so much as that she was dancing around points so as never to speak up in ways that might let her hometown opponents scream liberal. Honestly, the climate town hall showcased Klobuchar at her best by allowing her to speak at length on her own terms. In the debate format, she was less able to hold her ground, and she let a very leading question drag her into a swing at Sanders. She was at her best when she was going after Trump. Fortunately, she spent a good deal of time going after Trump. Beto O'Rourke had a strong night, one that's going to generate a lot of talk simply because Beto O'Rourke uttered, "Hell yes, we're coming for your AR-15." That part I did manage to, or I guess I was unable to avoid on Twitter. Saw that clip circulated early on. That and, of course, AR-15 and other assault rifles would be included in all of that. Since the El Paso shooting, gun violence has been his issue, and he's absolutely owned it, and did so again Thursday night. He talked about it in his opening. He talked about it in his closing. He made his strongest points on the topic. He owned it to the extent that every other candidate talking about gun violence felt obliged to tip their hat to him. That single issue probably isn't enough to move O'Rourke up the ranks, but maybe. Andrew Yang seemed very lightly engaged throughout most of the night. During his opening, he offered to raffle off money in a way that will likely run afoul of about a dozen state and federal laws. During an immigration discussion, he told one of the most compelling stories of the evening and actually seemed highly engaged. Mostly, he spent the evening being a little too cool for school, resulting in a lukewarm, detached performance. Julian Castro did not have a good night, and that's too bad. Castro had a stellar first debate when he stepped up to go toe-to-toe with O'Rourke, and he must have come into the night thinking that the way forward was to go through Joe Biden. Unfortunately, in the first exchange with Biden, Castro didn't just come off as downright mean and leaning into an accusation that Biden was senile. It was actually Castro who was wrong. In a later exchange, Castro was absolutely right to call Biden on his selective attachment to Obama, and Castro had some good answers to questions when he wasn't going after Biden. No one will remember, unfortunately. Ranking the evening on a pure performance basis, Mark puts it this way: Booker, Warren, O'Rourke, Harris, Sanders, Biden, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, Yang, Castro. So, shall we just take that at face value? I will. I mean, I didn't get to see the debate, but I thought I might share with you that summation. And if you disagree, of course, the opportunity to chime in right in the thread and let them know it in the comments, as always, is right there. Another person who had a lousy night, I understand, was someone who just barely made it into national consciousness in the last day or so, Texas State Representative Briscoe Cain, or as David Neer refers to him, Briscoe Cain. which I think is hilarious, and everyone should adopt it and hashtag it and capitalize it so that it's clear. Yeah, that's some name, right? Briscoe. I'm sure that he thought that was, or he and his parents, if that's his real name, really thought that was, Wolf Blitzer level name, right? Briscoe Kane, but Briscoe Kane is a lot less manly sounding. And really, if I had known there was cocaine being provided at Briss's, I would have gone to a lot more of them, I guess. I mean, just not like, boy, woohoo, cocaine, can't wait. It just seems like the party would be a lot more fun in general, and the people might be a little more, I don't know, upbeat. Okay, well, apparently he got himself splashed all over Twitter anyway last night for responding to Beto O'Rourke's insistence that they would be coming for AR-15s, with the tweet, of course, refusing to refer to him as Beto O'Rourke, but Robert Francis saying, "My AR-15 is ready for you," which it was easy to interpret as a death threat against a Democratic presidential candidate. But the Secret Service, as it turns out, will not likely be all that interested because they're not entitled to Secret Service protection at this point. Once they're the nominee, it's a different story. But still, it's getting them in trouble, getting them banned, at least temporarily, from Twitter. And, I think a lot of people made a good point about possibly referring it to the Texas Bar Association as well. And it was generally received as a ill-advised and stupid threat, and bearing out the interest nationally in banning assault rifles, given that they so frequently end up in the hands of people who do stupid things like threaten presidential candidates in order to appear manly and brisk cocainely, I guess. All right, we'll be back in 2 minutes to regroup and bring you another odd gun story, too, if I might drop a hint. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I mentioned to you that there was another strange gun story hanging out there. Justine Coleman for The Hill reporting this one. Looks like originally an Associated Press story, just by way of tracing the provenance for you. How do you like this one? We can add this one to the Republican Squad collection. I'll have to do that during the next break or immediately after the show. Controversial 3D printed gun creator. You remember the 3D printed gun? It looked like a giant Fisher-Price toy of some sort, but a very dumb-looking gun, but there it was. Controversial 3D printed gun creator gets probation in sexual assault case. Hey, who could have figured that would happen? There were a lot of red flags, really. Quite honestly, looking back on them, the fact that he created a 3D printed gun was one of them. The famous picture of this stupid-looking gun with him in his, ill-advised, formal business wear ensemble, I think screamed out libertarian freak show as well, but he's famously photographed in this rather ugly black and white and tan striped tie and a bright red shirt with some black pants, and I don't know. It's just, he's a young guy. He's dressed like a kid. And I guess that's appropriate for someone of his age, but all right, well, whatever. Anyway, the creator of a Texas company that provides blueprints to make untraceable 3D printed guns. I don't know if that would work as a, like for intimidating people. It's such a dumb-looking thing. But anyway, he's been sentenced to 7 years of probation in a case involving sex with an underage girl. Who would have predicted that Cody Wilson would end up sentenced Thursday after pleading guilty in August to injury to a child, according to the Associated Press. Prosecutors told the AP that they met with the victim and her parents before agreeing to lessen the charge from sexual assault. Wilson will have to register as a sex offender. That'll be interesting for his printed gun business, I guess. Go through counseling and complete 475 community service hours, the Associated Press reported. The company founder allegedly paid a 17-year-old girl $500 for sex after meeting her through a sugar daddy dating website, the AP reported. And I think you should just arrest everybody on the website, quite frankly. I'm sure there are some adult relationships, or, at least technically adult relationships happening there. But, what the hell? Let's become authoritarians and arrest everybody and sort them out later. How about that? After the affidavit accusing him of sexual assault was filed in Travis County, Texas, Wilson got on a plane to Taiwan, where he was arrested. Interesting. Previously, Wilson received attention when fighting to continue his business, Defense Distributed, that helped print 3D guns, saying he had First Amendment rights to do so. That was what made it so interesting, that he made it a First Amendment case, because it was instructions to print a way to screw around with the Second Amendment. I think that's interesting. A judge had previously banned the company from uploading the printing plans. The founder stepped down as director following his arrest in Taiwan. He will not be allowed to have a firearm during probation, the Associated Press reported, so that makes things super interesting. Not clear whether... I'm not sure what Taiwan had to do with it, except that he was on his way there. It made it sound in my initial read like he had ordered the girl and she was in Taiwan and he was going to pick her up, or what. But I guess not. Maybe the trip to Taiwan was unrelated, or he once he figured out he was in trouble for paying $500 for sex with an underage girl, whether he had it or not, or was just planning it, that he'd better get the hell out of the country, and Taiwan was where he decided to go. I have no idea. But, I don't know if we need to know that much more about it. It's just an interesting tidbit. Thought I'd throw it in there. How about if I then shift some gears quickly? I'll look through a couple of other stories, but as I mentioned, we've got a few more to consider here. Brexit news continues to roll, and I want to catch up on what's happening in the courts here, and I got a little help from Brian Monroe on this one, who will helpfully read us the latest, or at least when he read it, it was the latest from the BBC on this question. Let's welcome Brian. And remember, Brian's reporting to us from Canada, and we've had a couple, maybe that gives us a transition to some other stories from our Canadian listeners that we need to share. But first, Brian on Brexit.
Good morning, David. I want to read an article to you written by the Associated Press, Jill Lawless, in London. And the title of the article is, Boris Johnson Denies Lying to Queen, Wins Brexit Court Case. The British government insisted Thursday that its forecast of food and medicine shortages, gridlock at ports, and riots in the streets after a no-deal Brexit is an avoidable worst-case scenario, as Prime Minister Boris Johnson denied misleading Queen Elizabeth II about his reasons for suspending Parliament just weeks before the country is due to leave the European Union. In better news for the embattled British leader, a Belfast court rejected claims that the Conservative government's Brexit strategy should be ruled illegal because it risked undermining Northern Ireland's peace process. Johnson took office in July, vowing to get Brexit done on the scheduled October 31st date, even if there is not a divorce deal to smooth the way. But many lawmakers, economists, and businesses fear a no-deal Brexit would economically devastating and are fighting him every step of the way. This week, Parliament forced the government to publish its official assessment of the impact of leaving the EU without a withdrawal agreement. The 6-page classified document dated August 2nd said customs checks meant the number of trucks crossing the main freight route between Calais and Dover would drop between 40% and 60% within a day of a no-deal Brexit, with disruptions lasting up to 3 months. The supply of certain types of fresh foods and essential medicines would decrease. Prices would go up, and the poor would be hit hardest, it said. The paper also described major disruptions for travelers between Britain and the EU and uncertainty for UK citizens living in Europe, and said attempts to maintain an open border between Ireland and Northern Ireland would probably fail. It also said a no-deal exit could trigger major protests and even riots. Johnson insisted the bleak scenario was not what we intended to end up. This is a worst-case scenario which civil servants obviously have to prepare for, but in the last few months, and particularly in the 50 days since I've been Prime Minister, we've been massively accelerating our preparations, he said. Opposition politicians said the Operation Yellowhammer document, the government's code name for its Brexit preparations, proved that Johnson is reckless to consider leaving the EU without a deal. Former Attorney General Dominic Grieve said it was extraordinary that a UK government is content on inflicting on the British public the level of disruption which is set out in the Yellowhammer Papers. Defense Secretary Ben Wallace said the scenario was a planning assumption and would only come true if the government did nothing to offset it. We are spending the money on doing lots of things to mitigate those assumptions, he told the BBC. The government said it would publish an updated version of the assessment soon, that it would show how much progress it had made. The government refused to comply with another part of Parliament's demand, that it hand over email and texts among officials and aides discussing the government's decision to suspend Parliament in a run-up to the Brexit deadline. Michael Gove, the minister in charge of Brexit planning, said the request was inappropriate and disproportionate. The order to release the Yellowhammer document was one of a series of blows to the government by opposition lawmakers and rebel conservatives. They also passed a law that orders the government to seek a 3-month delay to Brexit if no agreement has been reached by late October, and rejected Johnson's call for a snap general election. After suffering 6 defeats in the House of Commons in as many days, Johnson suspended Parliament for 5 weeks until October 14th, sparking outrage amongst legislators and several legal challenges. The UK Supreme Court is set to consider next week whether the shutdown should be reversed, after conflicting rulings in lower courts. Last week, the High Court in London said the decision was inherently political and not a matter for the courts. But Scotland's highest civil court ruled Wednesday that the shutdown was illegal because it had the purpose of stymieing Parliament. Johnson insists he suspended Parliament so that he can launch a fresh domestic agenda at a new session next month. He said he had obviously not misled the Queen, whose formal approval was needed to suspend Parliament. About his motives, critics say Johnson must resign if it turns out he lied to the monarch, who is Britain's head of state and is bound to act on the advice of her prime ministers. In Northern Ireland, claimants had argued that a no-deal Brexit would undermine agreements between British and Irish governments that were struck during the peace process. A no-deal Brexit could lead to the return of a hard border between UK's Northern Ireland and EU member Ireland. An open border is crucial to the regional economy and underpins the peace process that ended decades of sectarian violence in Northern Ireland. Judge Bernard McCloskey ruled that the claim and counterclaim, assertion and counter-assertion, allegation and denial, blow and counterblow of the raging Brexit arguments belonged in the world of politics, not law. Virtually all of the assembled evidence belongs to the world of politics, both national and supranational, he said. If the claimants appeal the ruling, the case could join the 2 other legal challenges to Johnson's Brexit plans before the Supreme Court next week. Johnson said Thursday he was working very hard to strike a new deal with the bloc after the agreement made by his predecessor Theresa May was rejected 3 times by Britain's Parliament. Johnson's envoy David Frost has been holding talks in Brussels this week, but no breakthrough has been made, and the EU says that it is still waiting for firm proposals from the UK. The UK hasn't proposed any alternatives and anything that's been legally credible and workable, said European Parliament President David Sassoli. The bloc's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, told reporters that we are still ready to examine objectively any concrete and legally operational proposals from the UK.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Brian. And I guess I had thought that the source was BBC News, but it was in fact PBS News, another of our alphabet soup of news organizations out there. And but helpful, thank you. And I guess we're still waiting on the final outcome of the review of the cases against the prorogation of Parliament from the High Court there. But interesting to hear the Irish courts weighing in as well, along with the Scottish courts. I think most of the observers that we've heard from so far say that they expect that, the case just won't come out the way that opponents of Brexit were really hoping. I don't know if they really thought they had firm hope in reversing things in any way, but they got some hope from out of the Scottish High Court, but I don't think anyone expects the English courts to agree. All right. But because Brian let us know about this and read us the story all the way from Canada, I thought I would check in with another of our Canadian friends, our Montreal girl, BJ Hutch, who sent us this note just so we're aware of it, because we're all wrapped up in the American elections. And if not in the American elections, then in Brexit, we might otherwise miss the fact that, according to the CBC anyway, and I tend to think they know what they're talking about when it comes to stuff like this, it's official, and it's official they're letting Canadians know, the 2019 federal election campaign is underway. Well, that would be important news for Canadians. And let's see what we got here. Canadians have an important choice to make, and that's in scare quotes. So I don't know. I guess they felt very mixed feelings about being so strident and forcing all of you to feel like you have an important choice to make, but you do. About your country's future path, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau said today as he triggered the official launch of the federal election campaign. Today wouldn't be today, but rather September 11th today, which would be 2 days ago. But okay, I apologize, as most Canadians likely would in my position. Trudeau and his wife Sophie arrived at in Ottawa. Is it Rideau Hall? Rideau? How do you? I'm so ignorant of these things. Anyway, they arrived this morning, or rather on the 11th, to ask Governor General Julie Payette to dissolve Parliament. Okay, that would be, I guess, the official kickoff. That's what makes it official that the campaign is underway. Launching Canada's 43rd general election. The vote is to be held on October 21st. You people do things very quickly there. Wise idea. Dogged by new questions about the SNC-Lavalin scandal. Never read Canadian sources when you're American. They just assume you know what you're talking about and stuff like that, and that's just not suitable for an American like me. Trudeau, who is seeking his second 4-year mandate, wasted little time in posing what the Liberals hope will be the ballot box question. We've done a lot together these past 4 years, but the truth is we're just getting started. So far, not a question. It's coming, though. So Canadians have an important choice to make. Will we go back? Here we are. Will we go back to the failed policies of the past, or will we continue to move forward? There's the question. Trudeau told reporters outside Rideau Hall. Oh, my goodness. How bad is that? Am I way off? That's the choice. It's that clear, and it's that important. I'm for moving forward for everyone. That sounds pretty good. I think I'm for that. Trudeau's Liberals will spend the next 40 days pitching Canadians on the party's accomplishments, especially their efforts to lift children out of poverty and create jobs, while trying to contrast themselves on social issues with their main rivals. They'll also be working to distance themselves from the lingering SNC-Lavalin scandal. Okay, I believe you. Which reemerged just hours before the election call. Late Tuesday, the Globe and Mail reported that the RCMP's probe into the potential obstruction of justice in the SNC-Lavalin affair has been hindered because the federal government won't lift cabinet confidentiality for all witnesses. Sounds like an interesting parallel to some of the things that are going on here. No link for me to, I guess they assume that Canadians are educated and know what's going on, unlike here in the United States where something like this scandal would be linked for the morons who don't know what it is, like me. Anyway, maybe I do. Maybe I read something about it already and I've forgotten. It's entirely possible. The probe was the subject of the first question, of course, put to Trudeau at the media availability in Ottawa. We gave out the largest and most expansive waiver of cabinet confidence in Canada's history, Trudeau replied, sounding very Trumpian, I think, referring to the waiver his office gave former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould earlier this year, allowing her to disclose some details of her conversations with government officials about the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin, a Montreal-based global engineering and construction company. We respect the decisions made by our professional public servants. We respect the decisions made by the clerk. A Liberal campaign spokesperson said that as of today, the National Police Force has not contacted any current or former PMO staff for documents or interviews related to the SNC-Lavalin affair. The RCMP would not comment on the Globe story. Trudeau sidestepped questions about whether he thinks he's made any personal mistakes related to the SNC-Lavalin file. My job as Prime Minister is to be there to stand up for and defend Canadians' jobs, he said. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer said, starting his first general election campaign as leader, jumped on the headline today, taking media questions at the Ottawa airport ahead of Trudeau's stop at Rideau Hall. The Conservatives plan to go after aspects of the government's record. You would think that would be likely on their agenda, especially Trudeau's ethics breach in the SNC-Lavalin affair, while promising to ease Canadians' economic anxieties. They're economically anxious. I had no idea. Okay. Last month, Ethics Commissioner Mario Dion found Trudeau violated the Conflict of Interest Act by trying to urge Wilson-Raybould to overrule a decision denying a deferred prosecution agreement to Quebec-based engineering firm SNC-Lavalin. He has lost the moral authority to govern, Scheer said. I hope he finds it, because he's governing right now. But anyway, what today shows you is you just cannot trust Justin Trudeau. Well, if Canadians think so, let's see you do something about it. Okay, let's see where we stand here. The polls, in case Greg is interested in listening, show a tie. According to CBC's Canada Poll Tracker, an aggregation of all publicly available polling data. We know how that works. Conservatives and Liberals are now deadlocked after the Tories had enjoyed a lead stretching back to February and the start of the SNC-Lavalin affair. The Liberals are at this moment projected to win the most seats, but whether any party can secure a majority after the 40-day campaign remains to be seen. That makes the fight for third place especially interesting to watch. The NDP, which is fighting against sinking polling figures and a diminished war chest, is trying to pitch itself as a viable alternative to the two frontrunners and appeal to progressive voters embittered by the Liberals' last 4 years in office. We're looking at what's going on right now in Canada, and what I'm hearing from people is that they're done with governments that seem to prioritize making it easier for the very rich and harder for them, said NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, while kicking off his first campaign as party leader in London, Ontario. I'm confident people will see in us champions who want to put them at the center and heart of everything we do. Nipping at the NDP's heels in the polls are the Greens. Leader Elizabeth May launched her campaign in British Columbia, a region where her party hopes to make a breakthrough to build on her party's current 2-seat caucus in the House of Commons. Yes, you would want to build on that, wouldn't you? This is the most important election in Canadian history. Wow, everyone. That deserves dramatic music as well. I don't know. Everything always is, and it's fun to see the Canadians think that Every one of their elections is the most important too. It's not just something we do here. Okay. That's what the Greens leader Elizabeth May told a room full of supporters in Victoria. This election is about telling the truth to Canadians. Oh, good. About how serious the climate emergency really is. And we do that in order not to create fear. We do that in order to give everyone hope. We have a plan. Everyone loves to say they have a plan, so that's the thing to do these days. Former Conservative Maxime Bernier is hoping to make a splash with his new party, Maxime. Did I say Maxine? I did. I'm used to Maxine Waters here. The People's Party of Canada. That's the new party, PPC, by holding on to his own seat and bringing new MPs to Parliament. On election kickoff day, the PPC was polling around 4%. While promising to run a campaign to put Canadians first, he underscored one of the biggest problems facing his party, getting him on a debate stage. See? They have the same issue. After initially being turned down, Bernier is still waiting to find out if he'll be invited to the English and French language debates. Now that's a real twist. Being organized by the Leaders Debates Commission, which was established after the last election and is led by former Governor General David Johnston. After dismantling itself, replacing its leader, and then coming together again, the Bloc Québécois will be looking to win at least 12 seats in Quebec and regain official party status, a title it hasn't held since 2011. Bloc leader Yves-François Blanchet, how's that? Was that good? Whose party is also polling around 4%, spoke to supporters today in Quebec City, urging Quebecers to think of where they want to go, not as a province, but as a nation. Is that the message for that party? I don't know. Okay, well, we're all in this together. It's always nice to say. Let's see. Down at the bottom here, Secularism Bill emerges day one is the title of the next section here. The main parties are fanning out across the country today by plane and bus, hitting the regions they see as key to victory. While the Liberals and Tories are tied nationally, the way their support breaks down regionally could lead to quite different results on Election Day. Scheer's Conservatives hold a daunting lead in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and are hoping to steal seats in Quebec, and never put it past Conservatives to actually just steal seats, or anything for that matter. But Scheer started his campaign in Trois-Rivières. Is that right? Trois-Rivières, Quebec. A seat in the heartland between Montreal and Quebec City, tearing into both Trudeau and the Bloc. He'll finish the day with a rally in Woodbridge, Ontario. Is that right? Woodbridge. It's bridge made out of wood. Yeah. A suburb of Toronto. The Liberals lead by 6 points in Ontario and 14 points in Quebec, which could deliver around 121 seats at this point, according to the Canada Poll Tracker. Quebec-focused issues surfaced on day one of the campaign, with Trudeau and Scheer both fielding questions about that province's secularism bill, known as Bill C-21, which bans the display of religious symbols and clothing by teachers, judges, police officers, and other public sector workers. What's this aimed at? I said many times I am deeply opposed to Bill 21 in Quebec. I don't think that in a free society we should be legitimizing or allowing discrimination against anyone, said Trudeau when asked if his government would challenge the law. We are following very carefully the process. At this time, we feel it would be counterproductive for the federal government to engage in the process with which Quebecers are underway, but we will continue to monitor closely and evaluate our position. Wow, that's nothing, but okay. Scheer said the law is not something a conservative government would ever consider at the federal level. We'll always stand up for the rights of Canadians and the rights for expression and the rights of freedom of religion, he said. Trudeau is heading to British Columbia to hold a rally tonight, but that would have been a few days ago or a day or two ago, in the riding of Vancouver Kingsway, a seat held by New Democrat Don Davies for the past decade. While today's visit to Rideau Hall marks the official launch of the campaign, the parties have been stumping all summer. See, that's not fair, leading me to believe that they're being so formal and just starting today. But they were stumping all summer, airing TV and digital ads, circulating their campaign slogans, and unearthing nuggets of opposition research. The start of the writ period isn't just ceremonial. As of today, strict rules kick in on spending and advertising. Trudeau, Scheer, Singh, May, and Blanchet all started their speeches by reflecting on the anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. And why not? Let's end with focus on the United States there, shall we? That makes me feel better. Okay. And it's going to take a lot to make me feel better because staying static in the right gutter of the screen this whole time is an advertisement of some kind for, I guess, treatment for some skin condition or another. And it's a really disturbing photograph that's just been lingering there. And I'll provide you with the link if you would like to go and see. You'll probably, I don't know, I mean, maybe whatever. Your search history will pull up something different. I don't know. Maybe you'll get the same thing. I haven't been researching any skin conditions as far as I'm aware, but whatever. It served that up for me, and it's kept one eye on it the whole time, and I think I now have that infection in my eye. So, all right. Well, we'll try and move past this. So thank you very much for sending us the Canadian section of today's show. I know it seems like a departure when there's so much going on in American politics, but it's a good thing for a Friday. It's a good thing to try and familiarize yourself with like what's going on in your nearest neighbor and closest trading partner. And, it's wise to keep an eye on what's going on outside the country from time to time. So I appreciate it, even if it only ends up being an opportunity for me to embarrass myself with pronunciation. But it reminds everybody they're there, they're having their own elections, and Americans are pretty ignorant of it, and we ought to study up on it. So wise move for our Canadian friends to insist that we update our listeners on what's happening up in the north. Okay, back in a minute or so, back to the United States. Eric Posman can bring us back there and take a look at another Senate race, as is his will. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. Here we got a little bit of an explanation. I was wondering about why the Bloc Québécois would be speaking in terms of where we want to go, not as a province, but as a nation. Like that made it sound like, well, but I thought that was contrary to the general idea of the party itself. And, BJ chimes in here that the Bloc Québécois want Quebec to separate from Canada. Yes, that's what they mean by nationalism. So, is that what I'm supposed to take out of here? That when they say, where do we want to go, not as a province, but as a nation, they really mean, well, our province would just become its own nation. And that is what we mean. I'm kind of curious about that. Or maybe I was wondering whether they were sort of shifting or changing direction a little bit, or saying we can, I don't know what. I'm not certain what I thought that they were doing. Maybe I thought they were hinting at putting the separatist agenda not behind them, but moving it to secondary importance, or saying we as Quebecers ought to be leading the country. I don't know. Wasn't clear on what they were trying to say. But also clarifying here, Bill 21 is anti-religious symbols for government workers, and that I understood. Okay, and I guess we got it right. Nationalism in Quebec nation. And thanks. And I had a feeling that this was the case, that it was initially aimed at government workers wearing hijab or Muslim garb that would indicate that they were a Muslim. But I imagine it would encompass all sorts of things if they decided to word it fairly. And I don't know that anybody would be pleased with the outcome of that. But, somebody continues to think it's a good idea, I guess, and is campaigning on it. All right. Well, wise, as I said, to keep an eye on how things are going up to the north. And I guess we can keep our eyes up north for the time being. Eric Posman continues with what has become a series for him of examinations of various of our Senate seats. The Senate, of course, really ought to be getting that much more attention from us. I know it's difficult to take your eyes off of a presidential election and in particular a presidential election with Trump involved in it. He does so well at calling attention to himself. But a lot of what we hope to accomplish and a lot of what we hope to avoid, even if Trump were somehow to win re-election, can be mitigated, if not solved entirely, by taking control of the Senate as well. And as a result, Eric very wisely focusing on each of those races. This time, Montana. So we got a couple of minutes on that race and a candidate you may not have heard of, but should spend some time paying attention to. Right on up there. So we stay north. Take it away, Eric.
Good morning, David. It's Eric in Orlando. While the conventional media ping-pongs between the reality TV presidency and the Democratic horse race for 2020, it's easy to take our eyes off the absolutely vital battle for the Senate. So welcome back to the Senate Snippet series for anxious activists. Here we're not as concerned about the math, yet, and exactly how many seats need to be flipped, but we try to examine how many seats are winnable so we can win them all. After all, we have no idea what the political temperature will be umpteen months from now. We could be in a world where we need a perfect bingo card to win the majority, or we could live in an alternate universe where established incumbents like Mitch McConnell, John Cornyn, and Lindsey Graham are all lame ducks who just don't know it. Our first Senate snippet featured South Carolina and the emergence of Jamie Harrison in what will most certainly be the toughest general election of Lindsey Graham's career. Now we're going cross-country, trading in sweet tea for a snowmobile, and take a trek to the northwest. Montana seems like the typical landlocked red state that's 89% white, where rugged individualists revere their Second Amendment rights. It's the fourth largest state in terms of landmass, but 43rd in population. It's one of 7 states that has only 1 U.S. congressman, but being the country that we are, they have 2 senators representing just over 1 million people, while a state like California, for example, has 2 senators representing 37 million people. But in actuality, Montana is more purple than red. Yes, Trump won the state by 20 points, and Romney won it by 13. But Democratic Senator John Tester was just reelected to his 3rd term in 2018, and Democrats have won every governor's race dating back to 2004. But the second-term governor, Steve Bullock, isn't going to run for Senate, choosing instead to run an uphill race for president. It would be hard to blame Bullock in normal political times. He's been reelected and governed effectively while swimming upstream against a Republican legislature. He's passed progressive campaign reform and disclosure laws in Montana, effectively eliminating dark money in all statewide elections. Bullock also hampered his chances to be in the top tier of the presidential race by joining the race late, finishing the more noble task of completing Montana's legislative session before joining an already overcrowded field. So despite his credentials and clarity of purpose, Bullock was campaigning for 2020 with a 1990s playbook, a matter of sensibility versus sense. And while Bullock's ill-fated, or rather ill-timed, presidential run has led to obvious questions about a 2020 Senate run, he's consistently batted those away, fancying himself as an executive and not a legislator. But Bullock is term limited, and there don't appear to be too many executive jobs to be had come Election Day 2020. So we hope that he changes his mind and takes on the current senator that's up in 2020. Any guesses? Okay, I'll spill. It's Steve Daines. Never heard of him? Not exactly a household name, even to the political junkies out there. Described recently in a Montana newspaper as a backbencher to the backbenchers, Daines only really has one claim to fame as a freshman senator, and it's not a flattering one. Daines happened to be presiding over the Senate in February 2017 while debate was being held on the Attorney General nomination of Jeff Sessions. As you may recall, Senator Elizabeth Warren began reading a 1986 letter from Coretta Scott King to the Senate Judiciary Committee, where she expressed that Sessions lacked the temperament, fairness, and judgment to be a federal judge. Daines interrupted Senator Warren, reminding her of Senate Rule 19, essentially prohibiting senators from disparaging other senators. Warren said the letter was part of the Senate record, and Daines initially relented, before being strong-armed by Mitch McConnell in the nevertheless she persisted fiasco. So the Republican incumbent in Montana is someone with virtually no legislative resume, and of only dubious distinction, more Big Sci than Big Sky. The seat is begging to be flipped. But if Governor Bullock doesn't have a change of heart, Daines will be facing a general election opponent even more obscure than himself. One name that's been thrown around is Brian Schweitzer, the 2-term governor that preceded Bullock. But that's really been smoke being blown by national pundits, and there doesn't seem to be any momentum for that on the ground in Montana. There is one wild card, and it's quite a story. 55-year-old Wilmot Collins fled war-torn Liberia and arrived as a refugee in Montana 25 years ago. He later became a citizen, joined the Naval Reserve, and eventually earned a master's degree. In 2017, Collins was voted mayor of Helena, Montana, the state capital, and he won over a 16-year incumbent, thus becoming the first black mayor in Montana history. The mayor of Helena is a nonpartisan position, so the first time Collins declared as a Democrat was when he announced this year that he'd be running for United States Senate. The story has caught the eye of Ryan Grimm at The Intercept, who did a lengthy feature on him, and Collins was also featured in a 5-minute profile on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Should Collins win the primary, the Montana Senate race will surely get some national traction. It's not just an intriguing story, it's a uniquely American one. Well, to at least half of us anyway. Okay. That's episode 2 in the Senate Snippet series for Anxious Activists. I'm thinking it might be time to invoke the only one Senator Collins at a time rule. Someone should be deeply concerned about where we head next. Back to the show.
Thanks, Eric, and I'll include everybody Ryan Grimm article that he mentioned here so you can see the actual profile of the candidate mentioned, and I've already had to go in one ear and out the other here, but the basic story stuck with me. Sounded like an interesting one. And all right, so is it Wilmot Collins? Yes, is the name of the candidate in question. So I'll circulate that in the afternoon roundup that Scott will put together for us. And, well, then you'll be able to read it for yourself. It was more of a focus on the race itself rather than this particular candidate, but it does look like a good story, and Ryan Graham always tells those stories well, so I'll include that in the roundup. This news breaking as we were rolling tape here, and let me see if I can call this up and we can trace everything properly. Lisa Iannucci sends us the tweet of David Farenthold, the Washington Post reporter, who breaks this news. This emoluments clause lawsuit against Donald Trump, claiming he violates the Constitution by doing business with foreign governments, was dead, and it's now alive again. Story to come, but he includes the tweet of Deepak Gupta, who is the Supreme Court and appellate advocate and a constitutional lawyer. What else? Anything else listed here? He says he teaches at Harvard Law, formerly at the CFPB and Public Citizen. And Deepak has this note: breaking, we just won our appeals in the emoluments case against Donald Trump. So I guess he's of counsel on that case on behalf of Trump's restaurant and hotel competitors. Remember that one? The Second Circuit panel unanimously reverses the district court's dismissal across the board. Opinion coming shortly. He includes in his thread a link to the decision and then says, I wrote too soon, it's not unanimous. Apparently there is a dissent, but I haven't read it yet. So I guess that'd be a 2-1, not a 3-0 decision. I do have an early entry on the story, the published story front from that. Bloomberg was ready to roll with that one. Trump finances closer to scrutiny as U.S. court revives suit. Chris Dolmetsch and Bob Van Voris report. Trump was ordered by a federal appeals court to defend a lawsuit accusing him of profiting from his presidency. Wow, can you believe that someone would make such an accusation? Plenty more stories where that came from, of course. The U.S. Court of Appeals in New York on Friday reinstated the case brought by business rivals that accused the president of violating the U.S. Constitution's emoluments clauses. The ruling intensifies a legal threat to Trump over the mixing of his business interests with his authority as president. Unless an expanded panel of the appeals court or the Supreme Court reverses the decision, Trump will be forced to defend his actions and open his business and personal finances to scrutiny. The appeals court, by a 2-1 vote, didn't rule on the merits of the case, but said the plaintiff had alleged sufficient facts for the suit to move forward. A lower court judge had dismissed the case, which was initially brought by a government ethics group in December of 2017. Trump has maintained that he turned over daily management of his business empire to his children and set up a trust fund to hold his business assets, but he maintains sole ownership, gets updates on the business at least quarterly, and can get distributions from the trust at any time, the appeals court said in its ruling. It makes sense to actually address that. I'm glad they did. The complaint sufficiently alleges that plaintiffs compete directly with Trump establishments and that the president's allegedly illegal acts favor plaintiffs' competitors, the appeals court said in its decision. Separately, Trump is appealing a pair of Washington federal court rulings denying his request to dismiss a lawsuit by more than 200 congressional Democrats. They seek to force his compliance with the Foreign Emoluments Clause, which requires a president to ask lawmakers for permission to accept benefits from foreign governments. Earlier this year, the president won a federal appeals court dismissal of yet another emolument suit by the Democratic Attorneys General of Maryland and the District of Columbia. So that gives us a good rundown of where we stand in three different approaches to the emoluments lawsuits. And this one, I think, pretty well founded. And I think, though, that what it brings to mind, the idea that, the theory of the suit, that competitors would be able to sue on the theory that Trump was steering business away that they might otherwise ordinarily be able to compete for by unfairly leveraging the power of the presidency to drive people to his own properties, is not unfounded. I'm glad they brought that up. I'm also glad that the court took note of the fact that he really didn't separate himself in any serious way from his business, which tends to establish a motive, really, in driving business there. Because he can, in fact, not only a motive, making money, which, it could be a motive that his kids would make that money, but worse, it also establishes it, because there's motive, as a direct violation of the Emoluments Clause. This is him getting money, and he knows it very well. So I thought that was wise of them to include in all of this. Now, what it brings to mind for me is the later, all the developments really in the story of the Turnberry Resort and Prestwick Airport and the use of the Doonbeg Resort in Ireland as well, because in both cases we are talking about driving business to the president's properties that might otherwise have gone elsewhere. In both cases, there are cheaper and still decent hotels much, much closer to, in the case of Turnberry, closer to the Prestwick Airport. If for whatever reason you were able to establish that Prestwick Airport was a perfectly natural place to refuel Air Force jets, flight crews and others staying currently at Turnberry could find much more convenient accommodation right there at the airport, and it's almost assuredly the same deal in Doonbeg. And certainly Vice President Pence could have stayed a lot closer to where his meetings were, since the meetings were in Dublin. And the numbers have increased in terms of how many people are doing this. I have stories from both Politico and the New York Times on the case. Let's see, which one should we go with here? Let's pick up the Politico piece here. Natasha Bertrand, I think, is the reporter on this one. Yes, along with the lead on this one, Brian Bender. Air Force says it sent crews to Trump's Scottish resort up to 40 times. It's a lot more than I originally thought, I think. The tally represents the preliminary results of an Air Force review launched after Politico reported that an Air National Guard crew had stayed at Turnberry. The U.S. Air Force has lodged crews at President Donald Trump's Scotland resort up to 40 times since 2015, a figure that is far higher than previously known. The tally represents the preliminary results of an Air Force review launched after Politico reported last week that an Air National Guard crew stayed at Turnberry in March. Congressional Democrats have also been investigating military stays at the property, but have yet to receive any information from the Pentagon. The figure does not indicate how many of these stays have occurred since Trump became president, but the Air Force has significantly ramped up its overnight stops in Scotland under Trump after signing a contract with the Prestwick Airport situated 20-plus miles from Turnberry in the waning months of the Obama administration. Pardon me. Since 2015, the service has lodged crews in the area 659 times, meaning up to 6% of those stays were at Turnberry. So, I guess that begins to call into question whether or not the major thrust of things was to drive business to Turnberry. And it may have caught your notice that it was during the waning days, they say, of the Obama administration that a contract was signed with the Prestwick Airport. But do remember, please, that as far back as 2014, 2015, Trump was, as a matter of business for him in Turnberry, lobbying hard to find ways to boost the bottom line of Prestwick Airport as the closest and most convenient airport to the resort. That he had pledged in a, 2014 or 2015 tweet to make Prestwick Airport really successful, which ordinarily is something that he reserves for himself, to make himself really successful. Why, of all things, Prestwick Airport? Why would he choose that to pledge to make really successful? And the answer, of course, is because he thought it would make Turnberry Resort really successful. So, the figure does not account for the total number of people the Air Force has put up at Trump Turnberry during those roughly 40 stays. Politico previously reported that Air Force crews of 5 to nearly 40 people have lodged at Trump's waterside property over at least 4 stays since September of 2018. The Air Force has said the refueling stops at Prestwick and all related overnight stays are well within Pentagon guidelines. Of course, they could just have been ordered to say so, just like he did with the NOAA thing. Prestwick frequently books the Air Force crews lodging at Turnberry, the airport acknowledged in a statement, and often arranges for their transportation to and from the resort. Officials have also said the Turnberry bookings fall within acceptable rates for military travel, as military members are charged a government rate as low as $130 per night. But the Air Force did concede that the appearance of staying at the president's posh property might create a negative perception, and it has launched an internal review that will assess the guidance associated with the use of civil airports and lodging selection for aircrew at en route locations, according to a memo issued Monday. Still, the issue is the latest example of the intersection of business interests and what used to be unremarkable government policies. Air Force crews have been lodging at Turnberry because of the increasing importance of Prestwick Airport for refueling military aircraft. Now, how did it get that increasing importance? That's the subject of some question. In 2015, the Air Force made 95 stops there, lodging in the area 40 times. But through August of this year, the Air Force had made 259 stops at Prestwick, staying overnight nearby 220 times. The roughly 40 stays at Turnberry are likely to raise eyebrows among congressional Democrats, who have said the practice raises conflict of interest concerns and might violate the Constitution's domestic emoluments clause, which prohibits the president from receiving money from the federal government other than his salary. The House Oversight Committee has been investigating U.S. military expenditures at and around Turnberry since the spring, and has threatened to subpoena officials in an attempt to get more information from the Pentagon. Stays at Turnberry have occurred as recently as late June of this year, when a bus carrying an aircrew en route to Iraq arrived at Turnberry, according to a person who was there and an Instagram post by an Air Force crew member. Ralph Porciani, the general manager at Trump Turnberry, declined to tell Politico on Wednesday how many service members have stayed at the resort in recent years, claiming that the staff doesn't ask its guests what they do for a living. The vast majority of the crews lodging at Turnberry show up in uniform, however, crew members told Politico. Porciani said that reporters should stop trying to dig up dirt on Turnberry, which was on its knees before Trump and his family bought it in 2014. On Monday, lawmakers resumed a push for the Senate to adopt an amendment that would bar the Pentagon from spending money at nearly 6 Trump properties worldwide. The House passed the clause in July as part of the broader annual defense policy bill, but has not yet been adopted into law. Trump, meanwhile, has claimed no knowledge of the stays. "I know nothing about an Air Force plane landing at an airport," 40 times, "which I do not own and have nothing to do with. near Turnberry Resort, which I do own, in Scotland, and filling up with fuel with the crew staying overnight at Turnberry. They have good taste, he tweeted on Monday. All caps, nothing to do with me. The New York Times take on the story has, I think, a little bit different information about it. Inside the military's 5-star layovers at a Trump resort in Scotland, reported by David Kirkpatrick and Eric Lipton. Let's see how much of this we can get in, taking us up to the break. The middle-aged golfers, it begins, had finished their last single malt whiskeys late one night this July, and the bartenders were closing up. Then a bus pulled up to the Trump Turnberry Hotel on Scotland's west coast with a load of new guests. Several staff members said the doormen, dressed in kilts with long feathers protruding from their berets, ushered in more than 50 uniformed American military service members. After gawking at a fountain encircled by stone horses and classical statues, the troops piled their duffel bags around a table of orchids under the crystal chandeliers in the wood-paneled lobby, checked into their rooms, and headed to the bar to begin ordering some whiskey of their own. Throughout President Trump's term, officials said this week, the American military has been paying his money-losing Scottish golf resort to provide 5-star accommodation to the United States military flight crews and other personnel during refueling stops on trips to and from the Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and other locations. The chairman of the House Oversight Committee has questioned if spending at Turnberry is a violation of a constitutional prohibition on government payments to the president outside his salary, the emoluments clause. Other House Democrats have said they expect the matter will now figure into their investigation of a possible impeachment. Good, it should. But an examination of military layovers at Turnberry, including a 2-day stay by a reporter at the resort, reveals a more complicated picture. There is little evidence, they say, of a systematic scheme to enrich Mr. Trump. But the military bookings at Turnberry are the latest in a series of episodes in which the president's private businesses have intersected with his public position in ways that he can profit from. The pattern also raises questions about how military officials failed to anticipate the questions that would accompany a large number of American military personnel marching into the opulent halls of one of the president's golf resorts at public expense. Mr. Trump's defenders note that American military jets have been stopping in the region since long before Mr. Trump's election. A decision by the Pentagon to have its flights stop more frequently at the local airport was made under the Obama administration. I guess the next question is, how did they come to that decision? Were they lobbied on it? And who did it? I don't know that it would have made any sense for Trump to lobby on it directly at that point, but I'd be curious to know. The military says the vast majority of American military personnel who have passed through since 2016 have stayed at other area hotels, not Mr. Trump's. On Thursday, the Air Force said in a statement that it had found 659 instances when its flight crews stayed overnight in the area in the past 4 years. We heard about this one, about 6%, or about 40 of them, more than had previously been identified, though, went to Trump's property. Trump Turnberry was closed for renovations from 2015 until mid-2016, and I think that is an important point, too, and that probably figured into things as well. Those who did stay there paid a discounted rate. Well, they didn't pay it. The government did. Of as little as $130 a night compared to a typical price of about $380 a night. So I guess you might think, oh, well, he could be demanding much more. But the fact that he's demanding much less somehow argues in his favor. But since that's the maximum the government will pay, and it's just moving money from the federal government treasury into his pockets, he'll take what he can get. It doesn't actually help. Just hurts more. To me, it was honestly just a hotel, a place to sleep, said Nathan Wenzel, 33, a helicopter pilot who spent the night at Trump Turnberry last September, along with about 35 other members of his Iowa National Guard unit on their way back to the United States from a trip to Kosovo. It's better than a tent with no air conditioning, and I'm sure that it is, but I'm sure that there are some people, probably Trump supporters out there, who think, well, this is nice. You give nice accommodations to service members. It's a nice favor to do for them. You see, he supports the military. Well, of course, he screws them everywhere else. But then on the other hand, if it were Republicans watching the money, or, for some reason a Democratic president somehow profiting from all of this, they would have said, oh, the military should be sleeping in a tent to save money. That's what they're there for. They're used to it. They should make them do it. All right, we'll be back in 2 minutes to finish this story and everything else for the week. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's continue with the reading of the New York Times article on Trump Turnberry situation. Neither Mr. Trump's company nor the United States military has disclosed how much government money has been spent at the Trump resort, but a dozen Trump Turnberry staff members, all speaking on condition of anonymity for fear of reprisals, of course, said the military stays have been a regular occurrence and often encompass surprisingly large groups. Buses like the one that arrived in July periodically turn up at midnight or 2 a.m. carrying dozens of soldiers or Marines, several hotel staff members said. Less expensive hotels like a Travel Lodge and a Premier Inn are next to the airport. The Trump Turnberry Resort is about a 40-minute drive. And I think that is the important linkage here, especially if you're linking it to the reversal on the emoluments case brought by competitors to Trump's hotels and restaurants, who say that Trump is leveraging the power of the presidency and the promise of gaining favor with him by staying at or spending money at his properties is what's driving people to go out of their way. They're no longer engaging in competitive, market-like behavior about where they'll stay. The American military and whoever else is traveling through ordinarily would very likely opt to, if they're coming in at 2 a.m., right, do they really want to make the 40-minute drive there? On the other hand, they might be committed to losing sleep anyway. And for some of them, the idea of staying in a very fancy hotel, especially when they're not paying for it, which is also non-economic behavior, I guess, makes it worth, if it's a 40-minute drive and I don't have to drive it, I'm just sitting on a bus and I can snooze as soon as I get off the airplane and onto the bus and wake up and I'm in a fancy hotel, and some of them probably get an extra charge if they're Trump supporters from it being a Trump property, fine. But on the other hand, if you're really if you're the one making the economic decisions, that is spending the actual money here on behalf of the military, and you've got $130 a night to play with, why the 40-minute bus ride? And I guess they take that expense out of your hand. If the Prestwick Airport is arranging transportation and the Trump Hotel agrees to take $130 per night for military members instead of demanding $380, I guess that, it doesn't pose a huge problem in terms of the numbers. But if you're really trying to efficiently house troops and keep the costs down and get them the rest that they need, you would think that a hotel airport would be the more likely choice. And here, even though this suit would be taking place in Scotland, well, the Scottish courts appear to be a little bit more liberal and open to this stuff, given what they did with Brexit, right? Who knows? Maybe they would entertain it obviously couldn't be based on the emoluments clause, but maybe they could entertain some sort of anti-competitive behavior suit. And maybe if we file it real quick before Brexit, they'll be able to utilize what I think might be more, I guess in this case, more liberal anti-competitive laws that might be applicable under European Union law. Well, anyway, I mean, it's a long shot, and I don't think that anybody is going to be filing those cases there. But it's worth something. It's worth thinking about. Continuing on here, the bookings for United States military personnel staying at the Trump resort are made by employees of the Glasgow Prestwick Airport, which has an incentive to curry favor with Mr. Trump. The airport has become economically reliant on the military refueling flights, creating at least the appearance of a motive to steer business to the American commander-in-chief. Michael Matheson, the Scottish Transport Minister, told the Scottish Parliament this week, that the Turnberry is one of 13 hotels the airport uses, and that Turnberry is generally booked only if other hotels are unavailable, or if customers specifically request it. Who's the customer here? But critics say that the military stays at Trump Turnberry still underscore recurring questions that have grown out of Mr. Trump's singular decision to remain the owner of the business that bears his name while holding high office. Long stays by lobbyists and foreign officials at the Trump International Hotel in Washington, Vice President Mike Pence's recent stay at a Trump resort in Ireland, and the president's highly publicized outings to his own golf clubs have all raised similar issues. At times, Mr. Trump has appeared to promote his hotels at the same moment that he denies steering them government money. Nothing to do with me, Mr. Trump tweeted this week in all capital letters, as they note as well, about the military stays at his Turnberry resort, before adding in parentheses, they have good taste. Even some guests at Turnberry questioned the arrangement. I'm sure there would be a few, right? Some would get a big kick out of it because they're there because they're pro-Trump, but others who may also be pro-Trump are there because it's an exclusive resort, a privilege for which they're paying top dollar, and they might be disturbed. As this person, Bennett Roddick, a Chicago lawyer watching the sunset from the hotel lobby with his wife, said, "You don't want him commingling his business interests with his government interests." The United States military has been using Prestwick as a stopover since at least World War II, in part because of the extremely long runway the airport offers and its reputation for being largely free of fog. That must be, I'll take their word for it. What a reputation to have. Well, we're free of fog, mostly. General Dwight Eisenhower sometimes landed there. And after the war, Scotland gave him permanent use of an apartment in a medieval castle not far from Turnberry that he frequently visited. In March of 1960, Elvis Presley, then wrapping up his military service, stopped at the airport for a few hours and was mobbed by his fans. But the last decade brought trying times to the airport. The United States military's stopovers declined with the end of the war in Iraq and the pullback of troops from Afghanistan. And commercial air traffic shifted to the larger Glasgow International Airport. The situation got so desperate that in 2013, the Prestwick Airport, deep in debt, was sold to the Scottish government for a little more than $1. A little more than $1. So probably a pound. Why didn't they just say that? Whatever. Mr. Trump entered the picture the next year when he bought the Turnberry Hotel and its storied golf course. Why didn't he buy the airport? It was one of the courses that had hosted the British Open from a company owned by the Emirate of Dubai. That's interesting as well. Reportedly for about $55 million. Soon after, he flew with great fanfare into Prestwick Airport on his Boeing 757. He announced that his resort, was forming a cross-promotion deal with the airport to make Turnberry the finest resort anywhere. He told reporters in 2014, "We need an airport." There would be people coming in from New York, high-level people from all over the place. A lot of private aircraft will be landing with groups and individuals, and we expect to be using Prestwick quite a bit, Mr. Trump promised. Of course, then there would be not private aircraft, but U.S. government aircraft later on. Trump executives also began negotiating with Prestwick Airport officials to try to ensure that they would refer visiting air crews to the hotel. Wink, wink. Emails first obtained by The Guardian in 2017 show the details of the House Oversight Committee investigation into the military stays at the resort were reported last week by Politico, but at least for Prestwick, almost none of Mr. Trump's predictions came true. Oh, that's too bad. They're not really successful. The majority of the resort's customers are affluent North Americans, along with a smaller number of Asians and others who come on package golf tours. Few arrive via Prestwick. These days, its cavernous main passenger terminal is often almost deserted. The only airline that still flies into Prestwick is the discount carrier Ryanair. Remember that we learned about him negotiating with Ryanair to up its number of flights there. Only a handful of its flights come in each day, mainly from relatively small European markets. No flights arrive from London, Dublin, or North America, except for private ones, I guess. Years ago, we had more flights than other airlines, but it is very quiet now, said Margaret Vincent, 57, pulling down the gates Thursday afternoon to close the empty airport bookstore next to the empty cafe, empty bar, and empty foreign currency exchange desk. But on the opposite side of the airport, the United States military has brought back at least some of the business. The Defense Logistics Agency signed a formal refueling and aviation services contract with Prestwick in August of 2016 under President Barack Obama. The contract began being used in a major way, as Trump would say, in a major way the following year, after Mr. Trump took office. Through June, federal contracting records show it has made at least 925 fuel purchases at the airport worth $17.3 million. Really, though, can there be any question? An American military aircraft, often a C-130 Hercules transport plane, lands or takes off almost every day, according to local airplane enthusiasts who wait by the airfield to watch them. In part because of the refueling agreement, the level of American military air traffic has surged during the Trump presidency. After 145 stopovers in 2016, there were 257 last year and 259 in the first 8 months of this year, the Pentagon said. The number of stopovers with overnight stays, entailing booking rooms at hotels, has climbed from 75 in 2016 to 208 last year and 220 this year through August, according to the Defense Department figures. Trump Turnberry can seem like incongruous housing for military personnel. The white walls and red roof of the main hotel stretch along a high ridge overlooking the rocky coast of the Irish Sea. The windows look out over stone steps descending through rolling hills to the golf course, with the historic Turnberry Castle and Lighthouse in one direction and the surreal dome of the granite Ailsa Craig protruding from the sea in the other. Ailsa Craig. Sorry, I've reversed the the I and L here. Ailsa Craig protruding from the sea on the other. Each night at sunset, a bagpiper, also in a kilt, parades past the lobby windows right in front of the helicopter pad. For truly authentic Scottish traditional experience, he plays on the helicopter pad. Okay. Several of the military visitors complained that the resort was not a particularly convenient place. It is far from any restaurants or even a pub, and remember they can't afford and aren't given enough money in per diem expenses to eat there. A burger costs almost $26 at current exchange rates, 21 pounds. A blended whiskey starts at nearly $10 a glass. A day ticket for hotel guests to play on the signature golf course costs $495, even if they have golf clubs with them. Mr. Trump visited during the 2016 presidential campaign, and his staff passed out baseball hats with the slogan, "Make Turnberry Great Again." Since his election, Mr. Trump and his family have also brought additional federal spending to the resort. He stayed at the hotel and played a round of golf there in July of 2018, accompanied by diplomats, advisors, and his Secret Service detail. I have arrived in Scotland and will be at Trump Turnberry for 2 days of meetings, calls, and hopefully some golf. Yeah, you think you can fit it in there? My primary form of exercise, Mr. Trump wrote on Twitter during that visit. The weather is beautiful and this place is incredible. Eric Trump, who helps oversee its operations, visits frequently. along with his own Secret Service detail, which racks up the money even more, of course. Asked Thursday about the stays by military personnel, Eric Trump declined to comment, but praised his family's property. Glad they didn't bother printing that. Records show payments of at least $64,000 by Trump Turnberry by the State Department in the last 2 years, although part of that money might have been refunded, the records suggest, after the trips ended. The Trump Organization said it refunds to the government any payments made to Turnberry for those visits by federal government employees after accounting for the resort's costs, but declined to provide details. And by the way, the Trump International Hotel in Washington, I think I have a story socked away somewhere. It says they've abandoned their efforts to try and live up to their pledge to send to the Treasury all monies received from foreign governments. Gee whiz, the bookkeeping is too hard. We're just going to have to put that money in my pocket instead. President Trump, after he was elected, transferred ownership of his resorts, golf courses, and other properties to a trust. We heard about that one. It's not separate from him, so it's a stupid idea to begin with. The resort lost $4.2 million in 2017, according to an annual filing in Britain, continuing a string of losses reported since Mr. Trump bought it. The club had revenue of $23.4 million in 2018, according to a financial report filed in the U.S., its best year since the Trump's ownership. The company has not filed the resort's profit or loss statement for 2018, and that wraps it up. So some interesting observations from the Times, and really also, I think, bearing on the appeal of the emoluments case. Basically, they make a good case that people are diverting themselves and making stays and making visits to Trump properties when far more affordable and far more convenient quarters are available right there at the airport. Plus, of course, the weird spike in the amount of money and the frequency with which that money is spent by the U.S. military at the Prestwick Airport that he had pledged to make really successful. Okay. Wow. Let's see. A couple other stories that we might want to make mention of before wrapping things up for the day. Have to do it, I guess, sort of semi-lightning round style here. Let's see. What else have we got? Oh, yeah. There was the interesting comment by President Trump blaming his orange appearance on those light bulbs he doesn't like. We can maybe call up the clip here, and we might as well just play the audio and save me the trouble of imitating here. But President Trump talking about those light bulbs, and I did see the other day a Trump fundraising letter that was circulated naming, the top reasons why you should be voting for Trump and against Democrats. And apparently their top grievances now are, again, the plastic straw thing, but also the light bulbs and car emissions, all the good stuff that people of conscience are wanting to do to try and help repair some small portion of the damage to the environment or continuing damage to the environment. That really gets their goat. The plastic straws don't work. And the showers, the water doesn't come out. I can't wash my hair. You remember that one? Anyway, here he is blaming his orange appearance not on, bathing in saddle soap or whatever the hell it is he does in spray tanning, but the light bulbs. Let me see if I can grab that audio.
The light bulb. People said, "What's with the light bulb?" I said, "Here's the story." And I looked at it. The bulb that we're being forced to use, number one, to me, most importantly, the light's no good. I always look orange. And so do you. The light is the worst.
You know what, though? We don't look orange, and the light's not that bad, and it's actually a pretty stupid complaint to have, but believe me, the way he looks has very little to do with the light bulbs. And, of course, we're not yet being forced to use these light bulbs, but they love to make that a complaint. They think that's hilarious. Of course, we just think it's hilarious that he looks orange. Okay. Other news that deserves some attention. Let's see. Where can we go and get this stuff on the record and yes. We wanted to revisit this Paul Waldman, writing over at the Plumb Line, offered up, I guess this one we can't do quite so lightning, but it was a good follow-up. What Trump's authoritarian push on homelessness is really about. We did have questions about that, and it may just be more cruelty being the point, but let me see what he has to say on this one. I thought it rang some good bells. If you want to find an emblematic policy tale of the Trump presidency, you can't do much better than the president's newfound interest in homelessness. And that's really part of the point. It's new to him. He just discovered a problem that has existed for decades. His administration has been actively making the problem worse. His ideas about it are driven by his disturbing psychological quirks. The solutions he's considering are authoritarian and unconstitutional. He wants to use it as part of a re-election campaign based on hatred and division. And the whole thing started because of some lurid segments he saw on Fox News. Sounds like a perfect recipe for sound policy formation and sensible decision-making, doesn't it? Here's a summary of what he's up to. And this taken from the Washington Post reports, and I think the one we read the other day. Trump has ordered White House officials to launch a sweeping effort to address homelessness in California, citing the state's growing crisis. According to 4 government officials aware of the effort, you remember that he wants to round people up and maybe put them possibly in a disused FAA facility somehow, right? Yes, the president wants to send federal officers into major American cities to round people up and relocate them to some kind of government facility, though one official told the Post, we're not rounding people up or anything yet. Yet, right. Though it shouldn't need to be said, Paul then says, the federal government has no authority to do that. And who's going to carry out this forced relocation of thousands of people? The FBI? Federal marshals? The military? Let's back up for a moment. Homelessness is a long-standing and extremely challenging problem, and although the overall number of homeless people is slightly lower than it was a few years ago, there are cities that have seen significant increases in recent years. The main culprit is housing costs, which in many places make it unaffordable to live unless you're earning a high salary. For example, the median rent of a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco is a ludicrous $3,600 a month, or more than $43,000 a year for just rent. A job making the California minimum wage of $12 an hour would make you about $24,000 a year before taxes or any other expenses. So you're already halfway behind on your rent. And that's without anything else. So what has happened, or what has the Trump administration done about this problem? If the answer was nothing, that would be a blessing, because the truth is that the administration's policies amount to a concerted effort to push more people toward homelessness. They have tried to sabotage the Affordable Care Act and throw poor people off Medicaid. They have proposed huge cuts to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which would have included cutting funds for the repair of public housing, along with raising rents for those living there. They have waged a multi-pronged effort to slash safety net programs that keep people from falling into desperate poverty, of which homelessness can often be a consequence. They have attempted to kick immigrant families out of public housing. So it isn't as though the Trump administration decided it needed to address homelessness everywhere in the country, and this is what they came up with. Instead, this is very personal to Trump in a couple of key ways. The first is that, as with many of the ideas he has about the world, it came from Fox News. As the liberal group Media Matters for America has documented, a few months ago, Fox News began airing segment after segment about homelessness, focused on portraying certain cities as repulsive hellscapes. And here a quote from them here, who are we reading? This is Media Matters, quote about Fox News penchant for this. The network has painted a grim picture of American cities as, quote, almost third world in their decay, unquote, facing, and again, quote, a complete breakdown of the basic needs of civilization and filled with drugged out zombies chasing barefooted babies. Okay, that's what American cities are about on Fox News. Fox is largely focused on the issue in cities on the West Coast, mostly focusing on cities in liberal California, with a few segments on Denver, Seattle, and Portland and Eugene. Every city Fox highlights has at least one thing in common: Democratic leaders. They could do that in New York, but then people would say, well, why are you headquartered there then? This coincided with Trump's attack on Baltimore, Paul points out, as a disgusting rat and rodent-infested mess, which was also prompted by a Fox News segment. And I believe he is headed for Baltimore, I think, maybe today or this weekend, right? In July, Trump gave an interview to Fox News' Tucker Carlson, who has aired many of these segments on his show, in which Carlson prompted him by saying, "Many American cities have a major problem with filth." Trump responded, "It's a phenomena that started 2 years ago," an utterly baffling assertion, then claimed even more bizarrely, "I had a situation when I first became president. We had certain areas of Washington, D.C. where that was starting to happen, and I ended it very quickly." No one, of course, could figure out what he was talking about. But filth has a particular resonance with Trump and many of his supporters. I mean, he's a filthy guy by himself, and not only because those supporters view cities as someplace alien and threatening, a view Trump encourages despite having lived in New York all his life. Trump is a self-professed germaphobe who hates shaking people's hands and will banish aides from his presence if they show even the barest signs of having a cold. He also has a long history of expressing disgust at women's bodily functions, which makes the claim the other day, I think I saw somewhere, that he got in a fight with Brad Parscale about how much money Parscale was siphoning out of the campaign, and the only thing that broke up the fight was Kellyanne Conway sneezing on him, which is amazing that she didn't get executed on the spot. But he wasn't president yet. Still, as Trump may or may not be aware, in recent years, a growing body of research links political views with such feelings. In short, conservatives tend to have much stronger reactions to stimuli meant to invoke disgust, like bodily fluids or insects. I hate to do this research. Disgust also tends to be associated with foreigners and other outgroups because they're intolerant people, you see. When Trump describes immigrants infesting America, he's activating this response among his supporters. Not only should we hate and fear them, but we should also be revolted by them in the prospect that they might come and contaminate us. This is the political purpose behind Trump's new push to find some kind of authoritarian solution to homelessness, but only in Democratic-run cities. He wants to rile up his supporters and get them feeling angry and disgusted so they'll get to the polls and return him to office as a way to maintain the purity of the country and the places they live. Don't mistake it for anything else, especially not any kind of concern for those who don't have housing. I don't think we're really in danger of mistaking it for that, but thanks to Paul for that insight. One more thing I will try and cram in before we exit for the day. I mentioned to you the other day that we occasionally read tweets from Julia Davis, Julia Davis News, who tends to keep an eye on Russian state media. This was an interesting find from same Russian state media, TASS, as a matter of fact. A draft peace agreement between the Taliban and the Trump administration. Remember back when he was pretending last weekend that he was about to invite the Taliban to Camp David to settle this thing, and we largely skipped the story of how his ego blew the whole thing up. But I thought this was of interest. Didn't get much reporting here. The draft peace agreement said that U.S. forces would, and this is to be expected, leave 5 bases in Afghanistan within 135 days of signing the document. One would think that would be part of the agreement. But the U.S. and the Taliban would both, as terms of this agreement, insist that Russia be present at the possible signing of the agreements. Why in the world would that be necessary? I cannot think what they would be. Here's the translation from TASS here. On September 2nd, U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan Zalmay Khalilzad. Do I have that? Khalilzad? I don't think I've ever actually had to pronounce his name out loud here. Let's see, met with the Afghan president and presented him with a draft peace agreement reached between the Taliban and the Washington administration. Under the agreement, U.S. forces will leave 5 bases in Afghanistan within 135 days, right? He also pointed out that the United States and Taliban have reached an agreement in principle, but this version of the treaty is not final until it was approved by the American and Afghan presidents. On Tuesday, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Igor Morgulov told reporters that the United States and the Taliban insist that Russia be present in one capacity or another at the possible signing of the agreement that the parties are working on now. I can't think of any real reason why that would be necessary, but Putin says it has to happen. I guess that would be the only reason that they've got. Of course, it makes every bit of sense in the world that the Russians would preside some way over the American humiliation in Afghanistan as payback for our having watched Russian humiliation in Afghanistan in the past. Weird, not widely discussed, and something you should keep an eye on. Okay, we're going to wrap it up here and hand things back over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see what we got on tap for that. Oh, and by the way, I did see somebody pointing out, I guess only for us Americans, Happy Palindrome Week. We're in the middle of that one, in which the dates read the same forward and backward, beginning with the 10th of September, which we write as 9/10/19. Same thing backward all the way through the 19th of this month. Hang on, and I'll grab you what's up with Justice next.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Okay, count on Justice for the stories we missed out on today here, though I had them in the queue. Trump wants to indict former FBI Director Andrew McCabe for running the Russia probe, but a grand jury might not let them. Trump's diverting those military resources to build his wall, of course. Recruits, meanwhile, are using duct tape to patch holes in the walls of their barracks.